Our country is approaching an important election this November where the rights of LGBTQIA plus children and adults are at stake. Asian American and South Asian American voters can make a difference, but don't necessarily know enough about the issues. And one of the reasons we wanted to put this together is to get people up to speed, help you figure out how you can learn more and where you can get up-to-date information, how you can get involved. So today we're going to ask speakers to address the most urgent issues facing the country with regard to gender affirming care, youth and Title IX issues, including bad access in sports, reproductive justice, fertility, adoption, and surrogacy, parents' right to affirm children's identity, and advocating for LGBTQIA plus rights in our communities. So our speakers are going to be able to address those directly, and then we'll give a little bit of time after each speaker to address additional questions. As I mentioned, my name's Nirja. I'm a board member of Desi Rainbow Parents and Allies. I'm a parent of 3 kids, 2 who are queer, and I hold, well, this is so weird to say about myself, but I have a PhD in sociology from Northwestern, and I've been in higher ed for 18 years, and I'm also the director of a community engagement center at a Midwest university, and which is focused on community capacity building and leadership development. We've got Reggie. Want to wave, Reggie? Reggie Gravely is a Black and Kanaka Maoli Native Hawaiian queer individual. He began organizing college and obtained his master's in public policy. Reggie currently serves as the advocacy manager at the National Queer Asian Pacific Islander Alliance. He is passionate about bringing communities together to collectively solve issues, celebrating one another, and making lasting change. Then we have Ben Haseen, using he, him pronouns. Ben is an author, speaker, researcher, and the first openly transgender physician of Bangladeshi descent in U.S. history. He's committed to health disparities research, publishing and presenting on transgender care, health equity, mental health, and health literacy. And then we have Maya Satyaredi, JD, she, her pronouns. Maya is a queer South Asian former professional golfer, which I just am reading, which is why I sound so surprised. LGBTQ plus sports law and policy expert, founder and executive director of Queer Asian Social Club, and developed a sports project at the Harvard Law School LGBTQ plus advocacy clinic. Look at this awesome panel. And then finally, but last but not least, we've got Feroza Saeed. She, her, she's a trans activist and advocate. She has served on the first LGBTQ advisory board for the city of Atlanta, worked as a facilitator for PFLAG Johns Creek and with numerous organizations in the Atlanta area, such as THC, Trans Housing Coalition, Asian Q&A, Queer and Adolescent, and DesiQ, Diaspora, to create a safe space for Asian and Pacific Islander youth. So that was a lot, but we wanted you to know how many brilliant folks we have on this panel. I'm here mainly to just keep the conversation going, but these great folks are going to be sharing a little bit about the issue that they're focusing on. They're going to give a little bit of context and implications, and then really end with a call to action to try to get you all to think about how you can get involved in the issues that are most important. So I'm going to start off with Ben, who's going to talk about gender affirming care and reproductive rights and the impacts on LGBTQ plus families. Ben, take it away.
Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Ben Haseen, and I'm here to talk about reproductive rights and gender affirming care and how it's severely impacted by your vote and who we elect to our offices because it has trickle-down effects on our healthcare system. So one of the things people ask me all the time is why is gender affirming care being attacked now compared to previous elections? And this has a lot to do with using the healthcare system to stigmatize folks of many different minorities. In the past, in the 1900s, it was against Native American folks and their health. It was against women during the times of suffrage. And it was also against the Irish Americans when they were considered minorities and they were stigmatized for their use of alcohol in their communities. So healthcare has always been used as a talking point to further marginalize others in political systems. And right now, it's gender affirming care that's being attacked. And one main thing that a lot of people who are quite ignorant about gender affirming care is they say that hormones, when a trans person were to take estrogen or testosterone, affects their fertility. And that's not true at all. Many folks, both cisgender or transgender, will develop some form of fertility issues if they're trying to have a family, and that's why people who are specialists in endocrinology, help many families have children if they have the anatomy and the capabilities to do that. Taking hormones, taking testosterone, I've been on testosterone for 6 years and I can pop a baby if I want to. I just need to get in touch with an endocrinologist. Not that I want to in the future, but if I did, it wouldn't be an issue. I just need to be on board with more care from a specialist. Our wonderful Maya Reddy is here to talk a little bit about her experience with using in vitro fertilization to find a donor.
Yeah, so my co-parent and we didn't use IVF, though I am an IVF baby. We used IUI, which I'm sure Ben can actually, I forget what it actually stands for. Um, but it was really important for us to, I didn't carry, my co-parent carried, and it was important for us to kind of find a donor would, that looks like me. So our kid kind of looked like both of us. With that being said, like it isn't the be all end all. And no matter who our child was going to be, and no matter who he's going to be, we love him no matter what. But that being said, it was so hard trying to find South Asian donors. I believe there are like three big sperm banks out there. And I think amongst heavy research in all three of them, there were five at most South Asian donors. And I know for other, BIPOC folks, those numbers are still quite low and they vary from, group to group. But I think it's really, really important to recognize that. I don't know what the call to action around there is. But by shutting out, like Ben was saying, by shutting out groups from healthcare, reproductive healthcare, then it has that trickle down effect of impacting how we are able to see ourselves and our families. And that's always something that we should be aware of. And again, I do want to say this is not kind of like a me being like, we must continue the bloodline. But folks should have the opportunities to kind of like be able to see themselves.
Yes, and in terms of access, what you who you end up voting for actually has deep impacts on medical training in the US. So depending on who's in office, they can control whether or not we resident doctors who are getting training in their specific specialties get the amount of experience they need to provide that care long term in their careers. So for 4 years of a term of a president, they will be dictating medical training for all the physicians that are coming into the workforce for 4 years in their training, and it'll span their entire lifespan of their work. So if a typical physician works about 30 years in their career, if we have 4 years of limiting access to abortion training, limiting access to fertility training, and limiting access to gender affirming care, that's 30 years of each physician that doesn't have adequate training to provide the care for the patients that need that care. So your vote is deeply, deeply impactful for creating future physicians who are adept in providing care for minorities.
Thank you so much, Ben. How do you find out about local issues and how they're impacting what's going to be on the ballot?
I think what's really important is get involved in local organizations doing that kind of work. I moved about a year ago from Atlanta. I grew up in Atlanta to Durham area to do my residency training. And the first thing I did is I looked up local organizations that are doing advocacy work in the healthcare space. Just did a simple Google search and I found at least 5 organizations that are local to like the Research Triangle area in North Carolina. And I've been more and more involved with that. So Google is a really essential tool, and getting involved with local organizations where they're actually fighting for the things that matter in their communities. That's how you get more access and more knowledge about what's affecting certain communities.
Thanks so much, Ben. And then there are some questions around, information around gender affirming care. There's so much misinformation and disinformation. How can we figure out what are trustworthy resources for families?
Absolutely. I highly recommend looking up the University of San Francisco's gender affirming healthcare resource book. It is comprehensive. It talks about hormones, surgeries, letters from therapists, everything that you need to know about gender affirming care. It's written by a leader in transgender health. She's also a family medicine provider, Dr. Maggie Deutsch, off of University of San Francisco. You can look it up and you'll get all that information that you need. And it's all comprehensive and evidence-based.
Ben, if you're able to put the link in the chat, that'd be awesome. Thank you. And
For sure will.
we'll be also sharing resources afterwards as well that all the speakers have compiled, so you don't have to feel like you're having to follow everything in the chat. So for let me see, think about time. I'm going to ask you one more question, then we'll move on to the next topic. So the last one is, which you kind of addressed, but I want to give you a chance to say, why does gender affirming care need to be protected?
I think it creates a slippery slope when you don't protect gender affirming care. Not only does it affect trans people, but it affects people outside transgender identified individuals, whether it's third gender identified individuals, intersex identified individuals. Actually, the limitations in gender affirming care has deeply impacted young children who deal with intersex disorders, and it's limited their ability to live their life the way they want to, and they become subject to forced hormone replacement therapy because the government is trying to force the way that they live their lives. So an attack on trans people is an attack on a large number of gender diverse minorities.
Thank you. Really well said. Thank you so much, Dr. Ben Hassan, for all of your input and your brilliance. And we're going to move on, believe it or not, to another topic equally heavy and equally important. So we're going to talk now about Title IX and the SCOTUS case. I'm going to turn this over to Maya.
Yeah, so I'm going to start a little bit backwards with the Supreme Court case that is likely going to be argued in December concerning gender affirming care. It's US v. Scrimetti, and the case concerns a Tennessee bill that completely restricted all forms of gender affirming care for folks under the age of 18. And this case is really, really consequential because it is kind of going up before a conservative court, which is very troubling and anxiety inducing, but also has the potential to impact access to healthcare in general. Like reproductive rights is like completely, implicated when we have these conversations about gender affirming care, because it all boils down to bodily autonomy, right? And if the court is going to be using, for instance, the recent Dobbs case, which nullified, aka overturned Roe v. Wade, as reasoning to restrict or ban completely gender affirming care for minors, and that is obviously going to be used and extended to trans adults, intersex adults, gender, expansive adults, as well as all adults, particularly women. And so that's something that folks should really, really be aware of right now, especially considering the rhetoric that is likely going to just increase in just hostility, to put it mildly. And I can drop some links to some primers on what this case actually is and what's going to be happening after I'm done talking, hopefully not much longer. The second thing that I really wanted to focus on is Title IX issues, which right now really hinge on access to sports and inclusion in sports. And so I'm going to talk specifically about Title IX governed athletics bodies. And what Title IX does is it prevents discrimination on the basis of sex in schools that receive federal funding. So that's going to mean like K through 12 and often colleges. The only exceptions there, which I won't get into, are private colleges, religious institutions, etc. And so what we're seeing right now in the sports space is a lot of these arguments saying that because Title IX was established to provide opportunities for women and girls to play sports, then by including trans athletes, you are essentially taking away those opportunities from um, cis women and girls, which is wrong. First of all, the percentage of trans athletes participating in sports at any level of sports um, is very small, like incredibly small, especially when you consider that many athletes may not be out, and nor should they be forced to come out, right, until they're ready or, wherever they are in their journey. And so one, there is no actual threat. Like what opportunities are being taken away? Like folks just want to play sports, right? And the other thing is that, and we see this similarly in the bathroom ban cases, that trans folks pose a physical threat to cisgender women and girls, which again is wrong, right? Like trans folks are not transitioning, like there isn't a malicious intent to transitioning or to being your authentic self, right? Like no one is doing that as a way to, like pull a gotcha game over fellow athletes or, cis women and girls. And I think beyond that, the thing that I really wanted to hammer home in this section about sports inclusion for particularly trans women and girls, is that when you look at these bans, they often require some sort of certification that a person's gender identity is what they, is valid, which is problematic in literally every way. And oftentimes this requires things called gender verification testing or sex verification testing. This has been used forever in the International Olympic Committee, though was in 20 recently, the IOC released guidance forbidding sex verification testing. And even though that happened, right, like a lot of the bills that we're seeing in the United States implicate that and require girls and women who are suspect, right, who don't fit a very specific model of what femininity is, to be subject to what transvestigation is a term that folks use. Like, are you really, who we want you to be, or your whatnot? And this is going to disproportionately impact girls and women of color, because as all of us in our communities know, we don't necessarily fit, like the Western white supremacist ideas of, gender. And that's like fine. I mean, we're beautiful in all of our own ways, and like screw having like rigid structures like that. But because we won't be fitting the, and other, communities of color aren't going to fit those standards, right? Black and brown girls are going to be primarily the subject of like scrutiny when it comes to, are you really a girl? And we've already seen this with Caster Semenya and Duthi Chand at the Olympic level, both intersex athletes, and both from the global South. Caster, of course, from South Africa. Please don't fact check me on this. I know my shit. And then Duthi from India, of course. And then here in the States, we have notable athletes include Andre Yearwood and Terry Miller, two trans Black women in Connecticut who were sued for taking away spots from cis white women and girls, which did not happen. And I am very happy to drop kind of more resources that look a little bit deeper into that. And so a call to action that I would have here is that we really, as a community, are not fully understanding sports, right? And like what it means to play sports. For me, like I just wanted to go play a game, right? And like have something to do. And then I got really competitive and played professionally, which is not what's going to happen to most folks. Like most folks just want to play sports. I want my son to, try it. And if he hates it, that's fine. Um, and by taking that piece away and really focusing on this idea of a threat, we are ignoring the fact that we are taking away opportunities from kids, right? Like at the end of the day, this is about kids. And so I urge all of you, whether or not like you are kind of like very knowledgeable in this area or not, to go watch this brilliant documentary called Changing the Game, which follows the stories of four trans athletes in their high school seasons over a season, about and just what it's like to be a trans athlete in different parts of the country. So you have Mac Beggs, a wrestler from Texas, Andrea and Carrie, who I just spoke about, Sarah Rose Huckman, who is a trans, I believe, Thai adoptee in Connecticut. She's a badass. And they are all just like incredible, and through watching their stories and seeing people in different parts of the country who are affected by policies in different ways, it's like a really great contextualization and humanization of an issue that really shouldn't be as politicized as it is. I saw briefly that some folks may be asking about like the hormone conversations. There is a really, really great, this is a little bit denser, but I will also provide resources to this. There was a really great study that the International Olympic Committee actually commissioned last year that did not find any like scientific weight to saying that trans women have some sort of, athletic advantage, like inherently an athletic advantage. I think it's really important that we don't, when we're talking about kids, that we don't hinge these conversations and define performance by hormones in this way. It's just, and I'm sure everybody like Reggie, Ben, and Froza can speak more to how damaging that is in so many different ways. But in like, again, to go back to what I was just saying, right? Like, this isn't about professional sports. Like, this is just about kids playing sports, right? Like, it doesn't matter, right? Like, if we're winning or losing. I mean, like, in certain ways, yeah, it's great to win. But it's about participation, and you don't get to professional sports, you don't get to the Olympics without being able to participate in the first place, right? And so by defining gender in these really restrictive ways, like we are really setting ourselves up for a lot of harm in our communities. But yeah, I will drop a lot of resources for folks to kind of dive a little bit deeper into the nuances of this.
Maya, I was really struck, in addition to the data and the resources and the law that, or the cases that you've named, you're also sharing stories of individuals and the ways, their stories are really powerful. So part of what I heard in what you were sharing is the need to just hear these stories and learn about these stories. So when people are offering, well, what about this? We have, humanizing the experiences of trans athletes to be able to say, this is actually real people. This is not we can't just be basing it on fear, but on real people's lives and what are and the data, right, and the science that says that it's not making a difference. So meaning the IOC ruling. So to follow up, one of the questions that came up from before, so those who have joined us more recently, what we've done, because there's so many wonderful topics we're trying to talk through and have so many great speakers, we pre-selected, a lot of folks submitted questions, so we've picked a few of the questions from before, and then we'll still leave a little bit of time if we can get to it for some open Q&A. So keep pulling questions out in the chat, and we'll pull those in as well. So Maya addressed one of them in the chat, but one of the ones from before are, what are the best ways to get involved in local or state community, local or the state communities to advocate for LGBTQIA plus rights, like especially with, I guess, regard to cases and things that are coming up locally?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to, I'll speak specifically to inclusion in athletics. I think it's really about supporting youth athletics, right? Like if you have any connection to, like whether it be your own kids, friends, nieces, nephews, whatever it may be, I think it's so, so important to show visibly your support for inclusion and especially in youth level sports, right? And a really big talking point that I think many of us try who work specifically in the space try to focus on is this part of it being participation and letting trans kids play, right? At the end of the day, we want to just play. And so I think reorienting yourself to that framework is really, really important, and being visible in your support of inclusion. Um, Please don't be hung up in these like extraneous arguments about hormones, advantages, and things like that, because what we're talking about in the specific sense that's at the ballot is kids, right? Like K through 12. So it doesn't matter about like, we're not talking about the Olympics, we're not talking about professional sports. So those are things that I would suggest you really focus on. I think at this point, it's really about visibility and educating and having these conversations. And that's how we create a culture change that will then reach our elected representatives and leaders in our communities.
Maya, I also heard in what you were saying, the visibility piece is I hear visibility of, so even if you are a family that doesn't have queer or trans kids, that there's the visibility of saying there are many of us who want everybody, all these kids to have access. So that visibility of like, we are there are many of us who feel this way. It's not an anomaly. It's not one or two people. So the visibility is in saying there's a lot of us who care about this and it matters.
Yeah. A big thing that we really talk about in this space is the need for more cis folks to speak out. And I think, especially, right, like cis white folks, cis het white folks, but also in our communities, right, like cisgender heterosexual folks speaking out, especially women, right, like speaking out and being like, yeah, inclusion, inclusion, inclusion is so, so important in the long run. Ben spoke about how, like we're the effect that a 4 year term has, like, past that 4 years, right? And I think that the way that we are able to kind of mitigate, that's definitely the wrong way of phrasing it, so bear with me. But the ways that I think we may be able to weather some pieces that we are facing is through these community organizing pieces, right? And like building up, educating our communities so that we are constantly saying, like, hey, inclusion, inclusion, inclusion. Trans folks matter, trans lives matter, and we are going to keep fighting for, like, all of us, right? A rising tide lifts all boats. And for me, that's what I try to hold in my mind is like, yeah, I feel so demoralized about our current political climate, but I feel so energized by, spaces like this, where like all of us are sitting here talking about this, finding ways to come together, finding ways to unite and energize our own communities. And that's, you know, really exciting amongst, all of us probably feeling exhausted in a multitude of different ways.
Yeah. And you mentioned you're going to share some resources. So, folks are looking to advocate and become, be allies for the LGBT, oh my God, I can never do all the letters, LGBTQI plus rights in their communities. Are there key resources? Are there particular things that you think people could start with if they're looking to be an ally and an advocate?
Yeah, so again, I'll speak specifically to athletics. The big one that I always cite to is transathlete.com by this complete badass Chris Mosier. He trans athlete on the US Olympic team, US national team. He's gonna yell at me if he hears this. He is really, really amazing and is on the front lines of like all things that come to trans inclusion in sports. And transathlete.com is this incredible resource that really gives accessible, like play-by-play of policies at different levels of sports. So go there, changing the game again. Those are the two big ones that I'm going to put. And I know we're going to send out some more stuff after this, so I'll have some more links in there as well.
Thanks, Maya. Um, I think for the let me check my I'm doing really good on time. You guys are great. So timely. I'm so proud of you. Wow. All right. I'm gonna end with one last question, which is, a doozy that I think any of you could respond to. But what do you think is the most important issue for LGBTQIA plus community in America right now?
I think that trans rights being attacked are indicative of what's going to happen for the rest of the LGBTQ community. And I work in housing, so we have somebody here from healthcare. We're talking about legislative stuff. We're talking about voter elections and things like that. But even just from purely like a housing perspective, we literally have refugees within the United States of America right now, people who are departing from states like Florida, Georgia, and heading up to more liberal states where they have access for healthcare for their children, which is life-saving. It's not just gender affirming. I really feel like that's something we need to make sure people understand. It's life-saving gender affirming healthcare, right? Because when we're looking at what's happening around the country right now, people are taking losses on their houses. They're having to cut and lose jobs. It's affecting local economies. It's really crazy to think about all the transphobia we're seeing and how it's affecting folks. And I don't think that people have a full view of this. It's not just about trans athletes. It's not just about gender affirming healthcare. It's about lives, jobs, employment, access, life in general. So to me, that would be one of the most important things that we're battling right now.
Do any of other panelists want to? You can weigh in when it's your time also. So, I think all of these issues are just so critical. And I think, Maya, you put a really nice fine point on it, right? Like that, when we think about one particular issue, it impacts us all because what we're actually fighting for is the world we want, right? The world we want where anybody can be safe to be who they are and to be able to celebrate the joy that they can experience and we want them to have. And that means that we allow them to be themselves. So, all right, we're going to shift over, thanks to our timely panelists, to our last big hefty topic, which is focused on getting out the vote and election implications with Rosa and Reggie. So I'm going to pass it over to them.
Hey. Reggie and I are here from the state of Georgia, the state that delivered the last presidential election. So I think we got a little bit of room to talk about what it's like getting out the vote and why voting matters. I think that briefly for me, as a Muslim, brown, trans, daughter of Indian immigrants and woman, I think that every single one of my intersections, every single one of my identities is on the ballot in some way or another in this election and was in the last election as well. And I think that it's not just about elections. It's about a lot more than elections when we're talking about doing work, but elections are a big part of it. And for me, I believe that, you're not marrying the candidate. It's kind of like thinking about, being on a bus, and does this bus take you closer to the destination you want to be on? Specifically, one of my identities being Muslim right now, I think everything that we're seeing overseas, and we're seeing genocide in Palestine and Lebanon and Syria and Iran, and there's a lot of folks who've kind of come at me for actively supporting the Harris Walls campaign. And I can say that because I'm not part of any orgs here. But I think that one of the things that we have to really keep in mind is that there is a world of difference between these two campaigns. And when we're looking at what each party stands for and how that affects us in a multitude of different ways, we don't want to be one ticket voters. We don't want to be people who only use one issue as a determination on how we move forward. And for me, that's kind of how I'm utilizing looking at these two parties or multiple parties and what we're seeing out here, and trying to decide who I want to go out and support. Reggie, please go ahead.
As someone that is a part of an organization, I'm going to take a slightly different approach. I think in my role at the national level, talking to a lot of grassroots orgs, a question I get a lot lately, especially as we get closer to the election, is voting even important? And as someone that is abolitionist, that is a difficult question to like tackle, right? Because voting is a compromise to some degree. Like Feroza said, we are not marrying these people that are running for office. And no candidate is fully going to reflect my interests and my wants. And so my assumption is that everyone on this call may be registered to vote, has a plan to vote. But we might have some loved ones that are staunchly against voting for some very valid reasons. And I think having that conversation with them, one, understanding why they may be choosing to not participate, and then also having a different discussion. The discussion right now is at the national level. But we don't tend to know as much as to what's going on at the state or local level. So in Atlanta, Georgia, for example, Stop Cop City has been a really big local initiative the last 2 years. And to participate in Stopping Cop City, for those folks that aim to do that, you have to be registered to vote. You have to sign a petition. You have to go into the city council meetings and talk to your representatives. So those local issues that have a real big impact on folks' immediate day to day is a big reflection of what voting can do. Voting is a tool of many tools that folks can access. And I think it's really important for us to have those conversations with our folks that are staunchly against voting for real reasons and sort of identify how could they utilize voting, whether at the local level, state level, national level. We saw in Georgia, for example, with the book bans throughout the country as well. Well, the state legislature voted on that. Then it went to the school board districts to implement it. So all of the decision makers throughout that entire process are elected representatives. So even if folks are kind of disillusioned at the national level, sort of apathetic, there are some real day-to-day impacts that voting in local and state elections can have. And
I
I would
agree, Reggie. 100%. And I would say that, like, for me, I think one of the questions was, why is it more important to work in your local election? So for example, or work, participate in your local elections. But we had what's called an NDO, a non-discrimination ordinance at Tucker last year. And that's a local city council ordinance that was being put in place that would protect all different minorities, specifically LGBTQ folks, from discrimination because of some of the things that we were seeing. And that has nothing to do, obviously, with our statewide elections, nothing to do with our, national elections, but it would have given me protection as a resident within the city limits of where I live, that if I were discriminated against, I could take action against the business, and that there would be some repercussion there. So I definitely believe it is very, very important. When we think about day to day, what really affects your life, from your roads to your parks to your housing, permits, taxes, everything, all of those major items are really reflected in your local, your city, your county elections. And then, obviously statewide is much more important than even national, because when we're looking at different legislation that's pulling away rights, often it's going state by state, whether that happens to be reproductive rights, gender affirming care, a multitude of other decisions that are being thrown back to the states right now. So we in Georgia, Reggie, I, and Ben, who just went to North Carolina, we are having a totally different battle and a totally different conversation than what I think people in California are battling when it comes to their rights being affected. So I think that your local city, state, and those elections matter the most. But on a national level, I would say too that there are a vast amount of differences between the candidates that we're seeing, and there's platforms that are completely opposing. So for me, one intersection, as I was mentioning, being Muslim, has this whole thing happening in the Middle East, but then my trans identity here is like seeing the insane transphobia. I mean, literally, when Maya, you were talking about trans sports and seeing everything that happened with Imani Khalif from Algeria, like just a few weeks ago during the Olympics, was so triggering. Like to see the insane amount of vitriol and transphobic posts that were happening in our country, and realizing that that's what we're heading back to. And some of us have already lived through the last 4 years under him and don't want to go back to that. So I definitely think that utilizing your voice in every way, it's your voice. You should vote for who you want, but you should definitely make use of your voice.
And to support with that, I'm going to drop some helpful links in the chat right now. Excuse me. And I think definitely registration deadlines have passed, so check your registration dates in your states, but also check out some of the other tools. We would be amazed by how many people go into that voting booth. They make their selection at the top of the ticket, and now they have to vote for 12 plus other people, and they know nothing about these candidates. So in this tool, in these tools provided, you can also get ballot information, send it out to your friends, so they can also see what candidates are on the ballots, if there are any ballot initiatives or referendums that have come through specifically for your localities. You can read through those before you go into.
There's another question that says, how does voting work with other ways to make change? So what I'll say is that it's definitely voting is an important part of change. And as me and Reggie were just saying, right, you're not marrying these folks and you're kind of getting on a bus that's taking you closer to your destination. But I would say that working with organizations locally, Black, Brown, BIPOC-led, TGX-led organizations that are doing the advocacy work in your cities, in your states, in your area, that's really important. The folks have been doing this work for years. So rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, finding an organization and supporting them, whether that's volunteering, whether that's donating, whether that's going out and amplifying their messaging. Those are ways that you can change things. Getting involved in grassroots organizations for everything from gender affirming care, trans rights, LGBTQ rights, women's rights, racial justice, social justice. There's so many different ways that you can get involved. Elections are the beginning of it, but as Reggie was just saying, Stopping Cop City has been a huge thing here in Atlanta, which is a several 100-acre development that's getting ready to militarize and train police here in Atlanta against its own citizens. So that's why it was such a big deal in the city of Atlanta that we didn't want that. But that movement ties with the Palestinian movement and ties with just in general, liberation movements for Black, Brown, and queer folks. So it's really interesting. You can get involved in any way that you want, but pushing that needle forward is what we're hoping to do, as Maya, I think, and Reggie have said in the past.
Yeah, so we have you guys have done a terrific job. So we actually have time for additional questions from the audience. So what we might ask is if you could, if you are comfortable, just to write it in the chat. It helps us just know, how many questions are coming in and sort of be able to monitor it that way. But we'd love to take additional questions. If not, I always have more questions for you all. There are a lot of topics covered. What's coming to mind for you all?
Well, while we're waiting for questions, I think we'll end. Reggie, do you want us to tackle maybe how to actually get out and be active in elections? So there's numerous ways to do different stuff. For example, if you want to be nonpartisan, we can do voter registration. This is one of my favorite go-tos because I really like having people utilize their voice. Whether they're voting Republican, whether they're voting Democrat, whether they're voting third party, just getting folks to understand the importance of voting and getting them to register to vote. If you also live in states like Georgia, and there's multiple other states around the country right now that are attacking voter rights, it's very important to do this voter registration work and making sure that people are not being deregistered, taken off of the rolls, or that their voter registration information is correct. So that's one way you can get involved. Do we have any questions yet, Nira?
Not yet. Not so far, so I'm just watching the chat. But
the second way, although most campaigns don't really like this aspect for people, who would like to do postcards. That was a huge thing in Georgia. The Georgia Postcard Project did 650,000 postcards in the last election, and that was during COVID. So it really was helpful. This last go around, a lot of the campaigns have been saying that they're not excited about postcards, but I find that's a great way for you to be doing something while you're just sitting at home. You're watching, the Pakistani drama that's on tonight or whatever, right? And you're like just sitting there and doing kind of some mind-numbing work. Canvassing is really, really important. I think one of the most important things that people don't understand about canvassing is you can do what's called soft canvassing. It's not like hard door knocking. So you usually are only hitting doors of people who are registered within the party that you're actually going out and canvassing for. So generally speaking, a lot of people who are going out to go canvassing are like, oh, I don't want to go knock on somebody's door. What if they, scream at me or they're a crazy Trump supporter and shoot me? And that's generally not the case. You're looking at registered Democrats or people who lean Democrat and are going out and door knocking. Please add in, Reggie. I just talk a lot.
Sure. And I think one of the easiest ways to engage if you're like, I have never phone banked before, I have never knocked doors before, I don't want to meet strangers, chances are you've met your family before. And relational organizing, meaning organizing your immediate relations, is a super simple and really effective way to get folks engaged and also to do a temperature check on, your family. We all have different opinions, very different. But dropping this tool in the chat once again, you can text your folks this link. Hey, y'all, just wanted to see if y'all registered to vote. Most of them will say, I am so tired of seeing those ads. Do not do this to me. But since you're family, it could be a good way to engage the conversation differently, to either get them engaged, see what their viewpoints are, and just, learn a little bit more about our family outside of like, thank you for making the food.
Yeah, and not to mention, as Feroza mentioned, right? In some cases, people are, for example, on the campus I'm at, there are multiple groups coming to our campus to try to register, and not all of them are vetted by our university, right? And so some are coming and have a party affiliation or don't or whatever. So we're really asking students to double check and asking everyone to double check registration because you might think you're registered and it might have been a shady situation. So we just want to be sure, and people are getting deregistered, right? So there are all kinds of reasons to check. So these are great suggestions. A couple of extra questions have come through now. One you see, one I see. So I'm going to throw the one that I see, and then I'll have you do the one that we all see. One is what kinds of local level policies, like school boards, are most effective for creating positive learning environments for LGBTQIA plus students? So what are the policies locally?
I can jump in quickly here. Folks might know that in Pennsylvania, I'm in Philly right now, there was an elementary school, either an elementary school or middle school, that installed a glass panel in their gender neutral bathrooms, right? And so that meant that from the hallway of the school, you could see into these bathrooms. The school was like, no, you can't see into the stalls. However, right, like it's still looking into these bathrooms and still like a way to monitor and, ultimately out students who are using these bathrooms, because by and large, it's likely going to be queer and trans students. They, through a lot of backlash, deserved backlash, I believe they have taken it down. But I think that's like a really, really great example of where organizing at a local level has really big impacts, not only on that community, but sending a message nationally that this type of surveillance based on discriminatory reasons is absolutely not okay and is not supported by the vast majority of people in that community. So that's just one example. I know there are unfortunately a lot of similar horrific bills and policies around the country. But I think if you can keep an eye on those things, and even if they're not coming up in your specific city or community, like even if you just heard about this PA bill or PA policy, right? Like that gives you the opportunity to be like, oh, wait, this stuff is going on around the country. I should keep an eye on it. Like what's happening in my own community. And kind of like off of that point, I would be very cautious of rhetoric that's like, we're just trying to like, protect against vaping in school or like absenteeism. And it's like, that's not it at all. So that's, that's such a garbage reasoning. Because kids, we're gonna do kid stuff and, let kids be kids and don't police um surveil children.
So
Speaking
I'm
of
going to
children,
answer the
oh, sorry, go ahead.
question that just popped up really quick. If I have, is that okay?
Yep, go for it.
So when you're looking at a candidate and you're looking at how to look them up and their platforms. So there's a multitude of ways of doing that. Me, the most important thing that I like to do is I like to be educated as a voter. And I know that this takes a couple extra steps, but it is something that I think is very important. I like to go to my Secretary of State's website in Georgia, go to my Georgia voter page, click on it, and see what the upcoming ballot actually is going to look like. And it'll print it. I can print it out and I can actually see each judge, each candidate, every single thing, even the statewide, you know, initiatives that we have that are going up. Because sometimes you don't know when you're looking at these initiatives, right? Do I vote yes on this or no? This verbiage is very complicated, right? So I think it's very important to actually go if you can. Most states have through their Secretary of State an access point for you to go in and check out your voter registration page and then pull down a sample ballot of what's happening. The second thing I would do is, depending on what rights and what organizations you're working with and what matters to you the most, but almost every single national org and then statewide orgs like Georgia Equality, for example, are going to do what's called endorsements prior to any major election. And they go through for statewide, for example, Georgia Equality here will do city elections, judges, counties, and they'll say this candidate has made these statements on LGBTQ folks in this way or that in the past, or women's organizations will often do this on women's rights, or racial and social justice organizations will do this on candidates with where they stand. But most importantly, you can also go to their platform page. And that way, once you know who's actually running in your area, you can go to their page and see what their campaign is saying they stand for.
These are all terrific suggestions. I really hate to say this, we're running out of time because I think we could easily talk for a lot longer, several hours, in fact. But unfortunately, we want to respect everybody's time. One quick thing I wanted to say is there's a great question in the chat about how can we have young folks get involved locally? How do we help them be advocates, learn how to become advocates, and guide them towards representing their own voices? So I don't know if each of you want to close with maybe one suggestion for this, and then I'll just do a quick wrap up and we'll end up. And how can young
I feel
people?
like the landscape for young folks in terms of political engagement has really changed in really, really exciting ways. I think a really great example of this is the discourse around Chapel Roan, right? Like everybody has been a part of this conversation, and she's like an incredible artist and like an incredible kind of bigger role model for younger generations. And I think what she's really doing is, demonstrating to folks that you can be, vocal and fight for what you believe in. And that is what matters the most. And like with her, she has experienced a lot of backlash, and which has been horrible and would be difficult for literally any person to weather. And she still kind of like stands by what she believes in. And I think that's like a really, really great lesson to take from and someone to look towards. And I mean, she's so popular and so hot and so talented. So I feel like a great person to direct young folk slash any folk towards as a good kind of demonstration of political engagement.
Thanks, Wyatt. Anybody else want to weigh in?
My advice to young folks is that y'all have the ability to make a lot of change and reach out to folks in the communities that can make change. An example that I have is that there are many people in the hospital who are hospitalized and can't register to vote. But what you can do is reach out to hospital administrations and create a plan to go into these patient rooms and get them registered. Actually, there was a wonderful student that I just had recently who advocated for people to come into our state psychiatric hospital and get inpatient psychiatric patients registered to vote. So there are big things you can do. You can make an impact on the communities, but you can also make an impact on, checking off that resume for your college applications.
I would say that find something, anything that really, gets you going and gets you excited, and do something, whether again that is, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, racial justice. Just find some way to get involved. I think civic engagement is so important. And for me, somebody who's like 43 years old, I think a big part of my immigrant parents coming here was them being very active in voting, which is why I think that's somewhere that I put a lot of my work. Right. But I think as elders in the community, when we're looking towards our youth, finding things that excite them, that make them happy, and make them want to go out and do some kind of work, and support them in doing that.
Thank you so much. Reggie, do you want to add anything?
Sure. Apparently, I'm an elder now. As I was told recently, I said,
You can
well,
claim it whenever you're ready.
in about 10 years, you'll see me. I think my answer is more geared towards elders, in that young folks want to get involved. They're passionate. They have the energy. My knees started clinking the other day. I said, that's new. But young folks have the energy. They have the ideas, and there's an urge to get involved. And there tends to be not enough guidance, not spaces for young folks to come into leadership positions. So I think it's upon us to have those conversations with our young folks. They're what, 16, 17, 18. They know yes or no, like they know what they like or dislike. And they're ready to have those conversations, and we need to provide those spaces to have those conversations with them and then elevate their voices. And I'm going to drop my contact in the chat, y'all.
Thanks, Reggie. So that's a fantastic way to end this. We really thank all of you for coming. I also wanted to give a shout out to the sponsors of this, which now I'm like dragging back to where Arna told me, but we've got NQ, I'm never going to say it right. Reggie, give me the way to say it.
Incapia.
Thank you.
Incapia.
Encapia and Queer Asian Social Club. And we got Desi Rainbow Parents, as well as, oh, and I'm forgetting one. Tell me. Oh, yeah, I got it. And then Indian American Impact. And so these are the wonderful sponsors that made this event possible. And we want to thank all of you for showing up. We know you're here because you care. And what I think all of these panelists have shown is the power of our voice, that whatever issues you care about, it really matters how you advocate for those issues you care about. And there's lots of ways. Heard some fantastic ways to educate yourself, educate others, support others, make room for everyone's voices, and to elevate those voices who maybe don't get heard as quite as easily or as often. So really hope that this was helpful to you. And as we said, we'll follow up with additional resources for any of you to follow up, because there are so many great ideas and resources shared. And thank you so much for being here with us. Have a great night. Bye all. And then I don't know, you can end that recording whenever you'd like.